credibility is not on the line. The international community's credibility is on the line.
If we do not say explicitly that we will abide by this vote, you're making a joke of us. You're making us into theater.
Do you want to go to war in Syria? Of course not. Everybody, 100% of Americans will say no. We say no. We don't want to go to war in Syria either.
I've heard some of my colleagues compare President Obama's position on Syria to the decision to invade Iraq, because I believe it's a totally false comparison.
Freedom is back in style. Welcome to the revolution.
We'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way.
This is the Sean Hannity Show.
All right, thanks, Scott Shannon. Glad you're with us. Toll free, it is 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program as the showdown with Syria now moves to the United States Congress. Joining us now is Congressman Bill Johnson, Republican from Ohio, and Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania. And, gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Sean, how are you?
Sean.
Well, the president,
good to be here, Sean.
The president says that this red line that he drew in the sand is not his red line, but your red line. He said he didn't set a red line on Syria. Is that true?
The president continues to revise history. Unfortunately, the facts are troublesome. Things that follow him around, and he, in fact, did draw the red line. He did.
We just played it in the last hour. I won't replay it here, but it's kind of odd. Do you think the president, Congressman Perry, is trying to pass the buck onto you guys and say the responsibility is yours? After all, he changed his opinion on whether or not he needed your authority to begin with.
Of course he is. The president is known at this point for wanting all the authority and no responsibility. He said what he said capriciously. There was no strategy, and he backed the United States and our credibility into a corner, and now he's trying to use the Congress as the way out. And I'm sure Bill would love to elaborate on that.
Bill, I read you're not sold on this one way or the other. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sold on the fact that the president has made his case. I don't think the president has made his case, Sean. His foreign policy in the region is just an absolute disaster, from Libya to the fact that he didn't visit Israel until March of 2013, completely after his first term. What's happened in Egypt and his reset with the Russians, and now he's got a stare down with Vladimir Putin. I mean, it is all over the place, and Scott is exactly right. Congress did not draw this red line, and if there's anybody's credibility at stake here, it is not the United States' credibility. We've got a long legacy of proven performance in sending our young people into harm's way to fight against tyranny. We don't have to apologize, and we don't have to prove that to anybody. The world knows it. This president put his own credibility on the line when he didn't come to Congress about this red line in the first place.
I think the important question we've got to ask here, what is the military goal? How do we define success? The president, in his own words, keeps saying it's not open-ended, no boots on the ground. It's going to be days, not weeks, and it's not about regime change. So I don't understand what the point of it then would be, and nor do I think it's a wise decision based on what he's telegraphing and telling us it's going to be.
Well, that's exactly right.
Speak for himself.
Yeah.
I'll let Scott speak for himself, but I can tell you that as a military veteran, and I know Scott is also, I can tell you we don't like going into operations where we don't know what the desired outcome is going to be. And I have a real concern here about, number one, is there really a national security risk at play? Number two, what's going to be the outcome when we get through with this? Where are the chemical weapons going to be? Whose hands are they going to be in? And I know Scott will probably back this up. We've made many mistakes in our nation's history when politicians and presidents try to tell our military how to conduct an operation. If they want to take out the ability for Assad to use chemical weapons, they need to let the military do that. But that's not what's happening here, and the very nebulous uncertainty around what the objectives are that's what really concerns me.
Also joining us, by the way, right now is Congressman Kevin Cramer of North Dakota. Congressman, you've gone a little back and forth on the issue of military intervention in Syria. Where are you now?
Well, I've been wanting to get more information, Sean, but if I was to vote today on the president's resolution, I'd have to vote against it, and for all of the reasons that have already been stated. And I would just add this to it, Sean, that the uncertainty that surrounds all this, the uncertainty that surrounds our president and has for several years on this topic and several others, raises the question of whether he would even be capable of executing in a way that accomplishes a goal, even if he told us what the goal was, which he hasn't so far. And on top of all of that, my constituents in North Dakota are probably like constituents everywhere. They are war weary and they are adamantly opposed to this intervention. So I believe the president hasn't made the case certainly to Congress, but more than that, he hasn't made the case to the American people. And we are a country right now where the American people need to be convinced.
You know, Congressman Cramer, you raise a good point that this is a war-weary nation. One of the things that really frustrated me as we went into Iraq and Afghanistan is we went in united, and then because of the political environment in which we live and a bunch of Democrats on a daily basis calling George Bush a war criminal, and he's air raiding villages and killing civilians. That was the accusation Obama made against George W. Bush. It became so politicized, and then later President Obama comes in, and we never finished the job. I don't think we live in a political environment where we can actually accomplish what the mission is, because we're so divided on these issues, and we've got to take that into consideration if we're in to win or whether or not we're in to just make a point.
Well, and therein lies a major problem for the president and for all of us who have now had the ball passed to, because you're right, we are not united as a nation, but we're also not united as a world. You know, they claim that because of President Bush, the world no longer likes us. Well, guess what? They don't like us anymore now, but worse than that, they no longer respect us. So this indecision on the president's part has become a major political problem for him and for all of us. And our job is not to lend credibility to his indecisiveness. Our job is to represent the people that elect us.
Let me ask you, all three of you, to comment on my three top reasons why we ought not do this. But besides what we just stated, we don't have a definition, a stated goal, how we define victory, exit strategy, and the idea that we're not going to be open-ended, no boots on the ground, days, not weeks. That's not a military strategy to me. But my top reasons, number one, they haven't proven the case to the American people that, in fact, Assad did this. And number two, it would help. My biggest fear is it may create a power vacuum that would be filled by radical Islamists with al-Qaeda links, I think the most likely successor to the Assad regime. And number three, I think it's just unfair in light of the threat by Syria and Iran to put Israel, our closest ally, in such a precarious position that retaliation would be against them, not us. You want to respond, Congressman Johnson?
Absolutely, Sean. I think you made three very, very valid points. Number one, I do believe that there's little doubt in the minds of the American people, certainly in my mind, that Assad has used chemical weapons. But that's the issue here is this is not the first time that he's used chemical weapons. So what makes this different than any other time? And what made it different than when Iraq used chemical weapons during the Iraq-Iran war back in '83? And I certainly agree with you that the uncertainty around whose hands these chemical weapons are going to be in after this is over, should an attack occur, that's a real very, very important question, because we just don't know what that outcome is going to be.
We really don't.
And that goes back, that goes back to a comprehensive strategy in the region, and I do believe that there's a significant risk of putting Israel further in harm's way as a result of this.
Congressman Cramer, I'll ask you.
Well, Sean, what I would say is I agree with your points in general. I would say, though, that the Israel situation is what makes this more of a national security issue than anything. I mean, that along with the fact that Assad is a surrogate of Tehran, that's why we have a heightened interest beyond the fact that we use chemical weapons. I would certainly hope that whatever we would decide to do, if we decide to take military action, we would be doing it in concert with our friends in Israel and not simply making them a target of retaliation without their full counsel and involvement in decision-making.
Well, let me ask you, because Secretary Kerry made the point that he thought the opposition did not have links to radical Islamists and terrorists. Now, everybody that I've spoken to in the region pointed out that the more pro-American secular forces, the opposition that in part existed 30 months ago, is pretty much non-existent, and they have been decimated through this civil war conflict.
Well, you're right, Sean, and you're in talking about Israel and the security for the nation of Israel. This is what happens when you lead from behind. The nation of Israel has been placed in further danger because of the absence of a policy. We had an opportunity to address this situation months and months ago, and by not doing so, we put Israel in this position, and certainly have played a part in putting Israel in this position, where it's a danged if you do and a danged if you don't kind of scenario. And I believe that Israel's at risk either way. And the question is, where does the administration stand on supporting the nation of Israel? Because a lot of foreign policy questions around the region hinge upon that question, and I don't think the world nor Israel has a good understanding of that.
Yeah. What do you think? I'm losing track of your voices here, Congressman Johnson.
This is Congressman Perry. That was Bill Johnson. Yeah, I would agree. I asked Robert Ford, the ambassador to Syria, in March regarding the red line, what our strategy was, and he alluded to a range of options, to which I understand operational security. I said, can you let us know? Can you let the American people know something about that range of options? Not which one you might choose, but what is the range of options? I asked him 3 times, and his answer was, I don't want to go there. That's not an appropriate response, and what we're having now is the result of having really no strategy, but somebody that wants to thump their chest and act big and act tough and hope that, again, the president used hope as his strategy, hope that Syria wouldn't do what we all knew that he was going to do, and now, we put the Congress and the American people in the position of having to clean up the mess for him.
And Sean, with relation to Secretary Kerry's confusion about whether or not radical Islamists have infiltrated the spontaneous uprising of freedom lovers in Syria, if he's confused about that, then that does raise the question of the other intelligence that he's relying on to make this move. So I have never heard anybody that thought that that radical Islam had not infiltrated the
I didn't either. I mean, that was a surprise to me, and I don't even really think he knows what he's talking about. All right, let me ask the question about the politics of this. It appears, the Senate came up with their points last night, whatever the resolution is going to be, 60 days, then 30 days after, then the president would have to pull out of all of this. So they put some restrictions on all of this. But I guess my main question is, I was a little surprised and frankly disappointed in Speaker Boehner and Eric Cantor yesterday supporting this. They also said that they wouldn't go out and whip votes for the president, that this was a conscience vote. Is any pressure being brought to bear on any of you regarding the issue?
This is Bill Johnson, and no, there has not been any pressure brought on me, and I don't think there will be.
What do you think, Congressman Perry?
Yeah, I don't. No pressure has been brought on me yet, but yet we don't have a resolution, so it might be early in deference to the leadership. I'm hoping that they might have some different information that I have that changed their or made their position, but right now I'm still back at square one that the president has not made a case for the authority to do this, or that it's in our national interest.
What about
in his presidential interest?
Congressman Cramer, what about you?
No, I agree. It's with exactly what Scott just said. I've not had any pressure brought down on me. Anticipate hearing more from leadership. And at this point, I think the fact that the speaker and the leader are lining up behind the president on this, I mean, if I give them the benefit of the doubt, I have to assume that they know some things that we don't know that are going to be compelling. But they have to also be compelling to the American public. We are the people's house, and we respond and answer to the people. And so, we need a lot more transparency and a lot more clarity.
Well, I can't imagine under any scenario saying that it's going to be days, not weeks, no regime change, not open-ended. I can't imagine that under any scenario that could be a successful military operation. And
well, even more so than Sean, as a military guy, when you look at that list that you just rattled off, you wonder, as a person that would have to service the target, so to speak, and meet an objective, what is the commander's intent here? What is it? And especially
send a message.
When we send a message, when you publish the target list. When you publish a target list, if you're on the target list, you change you change what you're doing, and so what is the efficacy in the strategy of doing that?
That's a great point.
And you got to wonder.
All right, let me ask one last question on defunding Obamacare. Where do you three stand on it? Congressman Johnson, I'm for defunding it. Where are you?
Sean, if there is a way to defund Obamacare, you can better believe I'm going to support that. But as you know, and as you have probably heard, much of the funding of Obamacare is in mandatory spending. It was built into the law.
Yep.
We can chip away at it. We can chip away at it in the discretionary funding in the continuing resolution. But that's not going to solve the total problem. So it's a big issue. I'm for repealing Obamacare, and if we can get it defunded, I'd be one of the first ones to sign
But I understand that you can put a separate bill in that would defund the mandatory portion of it. Is that correct?
Not in a continuing resolution. It would have to be done as part of another effort. And then the only way you can do it as a standalone bill, Sean, is you well know, you've got to have support of the Senate in order to get that done.
Real quick, Congressman Perry and Congressman Cramer, just you supporting efforts to defund it?
Defund it. I say pass the 12 appropriations bill, cut Obamacare out of it, and send it to the Senate, and let them vote yes or no.
All right. What do you think, Congressman Cramer?
Well, I want to use whatever strategy and tactics get the job done, and if it's defunding it in the continuing resolution, I'm open to that. If it's negotiating it with other leverage, I'm for whatever wins the fight. I don't want to have a fight just to take one more vote to repeal Obamacare or defund it. I want to take a vote that actually accomplishes the job.
All right, guys. Thanks to all of you. By the way, Congressman Cramer, I've been telling my listeners that if I was out of work, I'd go to live in your state, considering you're doing so well with all the oil.
Hey, listen, we have about 30,000 job openings right now, and our personal per capita income tops the nation. So come on over.
By the way, the only problem I have with North Dakota is it's a little too cold for me. Look, I want to live in Florida. That's where I'm more suited for warm weather. But
well, listen, when they discover oil or shale oil in Florida, we're happy to come down and teach them how to do it.
Well, they found it in Texas. But thank you all for being with us. Appreciate it.